Welcome to the Water Cooler, where I talk about what's happening today and what's on my mind. First thing is the World Cup is a hot topic. The biggest change, and perhaps the most interesting change, is this clash between technology and tradition and how it changes the psychology of the players and the psychology of the game. We now have chips in the ball, which tell the officials when the ball, if the ball has gone out, whether it's a goal, and there's also the snickometer, which tells you if there have been micro touches to calculate whether someone is offside or not. This technology fundamentally changes how people behave, because before we had incidences like Maradona's hand of God, which was high friction. It had a lot of human error, and it was very subjective. Perhaps you could influence the referee, but now it was removed that subjectivity and brought it over to technology. Now, how does this have an impact on our day-to-day or in other aspects of life? Let's think about this in terms of friction points. So to think about this, let's quickly run through the consumer engine and look at some examples in history. So there's two in mind. The first one is the importance of having the average consumer being able to have purchasing power, and this becomes part of the engine that grows an economy. We can see this in history through Ford. So Ford Model T, one very famous thing that he did was raise the wages of the workers. And by raising the wages of the workers and Ford himself said this, he wanted the workers to be able to aspire to own their own car. But by doing that, he has created a bigger customer base for the product that they're building. And I think that this is very important in terms of this engine. This is like, in a way, a positive reinforcement of this engine. In history, there have been negative reinforcements or things that have gone the other way. And probably the most famous one is to do with Bismarck. And what happened here was we had coal miners who went on strike because they demanded better pay, better working conditions, and so on. And there was a lot of conflict there that led to ultimately Bismarck being fired. And the bigger impact in terms of this particular incident was the introduction of some kind of social welfare for the workers in question. So this was like an example of introducing social welfare to the system. And this came from a place not because unlike Ford, which wanted to promote workers to strive for something, it came out from something that was very, very negative, right? It came out from a place that was not from altruism, but it instead became a method to introduce this kind of systemic lubricant to ensure the machine kept running, right? Like without this, workers went on strike, the engine stopped running, people stopped making money, people stopped producing goods. But this thing was introduced now so that people could be happier, or people would be able to work. And this kind of concept is something we need to think about in terms of these friction points in the consumer wheel. How does this relate to the world today? So we looked at Ford, we looked at the German strikes. And in today's world, we have a very interesting paradox. And I've written American consumer primarily because there are many, many examples of this with Caleb Hammer and the financial audit, where you have people who earn a lot of money and leave or are unable to pay rent. And there's many, many reasons for this to do with like consumption, but it is also, I believe, highly societal. There's a lot of societal pressure, a lot of societal expectations, whether it's to do with student loans, whether it's to do with how one should live. Could be a home, it could be private schools, it could be the demands or expectations to be eating out, or the demand to put up with appearances. This in itself has caused a lot of friction leading to, even if people may have a 200,000 annual salary, being unable to pay rent and defaulting on rent or mortgage payments. It's a very interesting and very unfortunate phenomenon that we should really think about in terms of like how the societal works, how do the gears around work, and where the friction points are. These problems are not only in the US, but I think it's part of many like Western or Anglosphere countries and societies where there are extremely high cost of living, Australia being another one, of course, with the housing price crisis. Okay, onward to AI now. Probably one of the most interesting thing that has come up on my radar is AMD. AMD is interesting standpoint where there are a lot of claims and a lot of pricing that are like half the price of other setups or other chips, promising to have similar throughputs, but perhaps one of the biggest issues, and this came up with like Strix Halo versus like DGX Spark, is just to do with execution, and yeah, just to do with how things work. This isn't to say Strix Halo didn't work. In fact, I think many people lauded Strix Halo to be a wonderful alternative to NVIDIA DGX, specifically on the price front. It was probably, at the time when it first launched, around half the price compared with DGX, and you got similar amount of throughputs. Like you could get like the 128 gig unified RAM to run your LLMs for a fraction of the price compared with other setups. But this doesn't mean that AMD is out of it. I think there's still a lot of issues to do with AMD and growing their market position. So that's something to look out for and something to keep eyes on. I think there was a recent announcement related to the AMD hardware changes, and in that announcement, the reaction from what I saw was fairly lukewarm. It felt like it was a rebranding of the Strix Halo, wasn't anything new, but that's just me skimming the surface without doing a deeper dive. Maybe that's a video for next time. I want to end with this. How do we endure in this time of friction? There's a lot going on. And perhaps the framing of this is not to be overly negative, but I really want to impress on myself as well that there are a lot of good things and there are a lot of advances, and perhaps mentioning cases in history to show that there really isn't anything new under the sun. But let's look at it from a different way. How can we persist? And I think there are three angles. First thing is there is always a need to expend more and more effort. Effort always wins over talent. The second thing is value in mentorship. Always seek out people who have been through this. Talk to people. They will have plenty of experience to help you through difficult scenarios. The scenario today that we see, maybe there are older folks who have been through, for example, the GFC, or people who have gone through .com. There are always cycles with whether it be in economics or even technology. Seeking out their advice and learning their stories may help give perspective and teach you how you can apply what they have seen to the current situation here. And finally, I think it's important to be positive. Being overly negative will only breed negativity. Of course, we can't be overly positive and to the point of being unrealistic, but I think being positive will allow us to survive systemic shocks. That's all the water cooler today. See you next time.